Now is Miguel Cullen. He's the author of 4 books of poetry. Based in London, of mixed English and Argentine heritage, he's made a reputation through prolific writing and his use of multimedia in his books. A poetry book like no other, In Dreams of Diminished Responsibility, is his 4th collection. The poems make up a dream diary as seen through hallucinations in an underground exploration of the subconscious, featuring sex and drugs, social media and mythological creatures. It's fitted with a sound chip playing music from a 1998 rave in Leicester. Welcome to the book show, Miguel.
How's it going?
Great. Thanks very much for joining us. So I love the idea of this sound chip playing music from a rave. Tell us about that and how does that work?
Basically, I've always been a bit of a geek when it comes to like drum and bass rave tapes. There's a whole community out there who of about 10 people who tend to put things on YouTube channels and know a lot and stuff. And I'm not really part of that, but I've always been a kind of fan. And I used to go raving a lot, and now I've got kids. It's not as possible, really. I do get my daughter to say more fire when Shabba says more, you say fire. But basically, I was kind of like melding it in with my poetic experience. So the first book I did in 2014, I was kind of imagining the empire of the UK and believing we are here because you were there. That kind of like idea of empire returning to the motherland. I had this kind of funny idea about this tyrannical Alexander the Great type. I was thinking about my own personal experience of my own personal experience and how it could mix in with the rave sample. And I had a dream about these 2 rival dealers in a rave and how it connected to nostalgia, and the drugs were sort of, a conduit to a sort of higher state of consciousness, like a nostalgia. And I basically connected that with the rivalry between 2 different people, and I found a clip in this place in Leicester, in the Starlight 2001 Club in Leicester in October 1998, and it's basically Trigger, who's the MC, who's got one eye because he had a gangland kind of violence problem, and basically I decided to put that clip in because someone lets off a firework in the party, and then he thinks it's a gun, so he starts kind of pleading with a gunman and telling the gunman in a kind of like father figure way to put down the big thing. So basically I thought that was also sort of quite funny, the way he would talk in this kind of like jokey way about arms incident, and it was like terrible. So I found it quite refreshing, and I thought in a way, that kind of aggression, when you put on a kind of something that's very underground in an art form which can be seen as like literary fiction, which is quite isolated at the top, I felt that putting something quite sort of ghetto, if you were to use that language, is a kind of quite refreshing kind of way of highlighting the book. And I've always believed that books should do more than just sit on shelves and have words printed always inside the books. There should be more of a kind of, kind of multimedia vibe to it.
That's great. So is the idea that people listen to the music whilst reading the book or do it separately?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking at one point, the idea is to listen to it while you are immersed in the kind of contact thrill of the music. But at the same time, it's something to bring poetry out of the sort of like rather cosseted English pub first floor where people do readings, and it's all rather, I don't know, that was the impression I got when I first got into the poetry world, tried to get into the poetry world, I should say, that it was all lots of people living in sort of windmills, kind of like writing about, I don't know what you want to write about if you live in a windmill, but like the water, the water gushing through it, and the sort of, I don't know, maybe I've ended up like that in my old age, 10 years later. I sort of do write sometimes about the gushing of the water, and some people are like, well, where are you going with that? I don't mind lyrical poetry at all, and actually some of my favourite poet is Ishion Hutchinson, who's the Jamaican poet who lives in America, teaches at Cornell. He's basically my favourite poet. I love
his poetry because it comes from a really tough place. Like he grew up, I think some of the language is kind of slightly tempered and sort of made shiny by some of his experiences. And I would equate my mental health problems with schizoaffective and things like that, with also having a bit of a life-altering experience. I appreciate poetry that comes from a place of struggle, but at the same time, you know, there's other poets I love like Sam Riviere, or his poetry which uses AI and quite sardonic, ironic kind of like language is all good. But also like humour in poetry, I think it's really important. And it's one of my strong suits, I think, but I don't use it enough. So I think if anyone's out there kind of like writing about stuff, always use humour because it can diffuse even the most serious situations.
Yeah.
We're talking totalitarianism or, you know, Elon Musk and all that kind of Twitter stuff. You know, if you use humour, you rise above it in a way that is the way we should really rise above things, because we're not subjects, as the English are often portrayed as subjects of the Queen and the King and stuff. But like, we should be rebels. We should, you know, like rebel. And apparently, I think Freud said that humour is a type of narcissism. It's a kind of way of kind of rising above for a second of the situation. I think that's quite cool.
So I want to ask you about some of the different subjects that your poetry's about. What have you written about Robert De Niro?
Yeah, I wrote about Robert De Niro. Like, there's a bit where he figures in a poem that I'm writing about a friend who sort of has to live with a condition. And basically, I equate that to, I think it's the Bronx Tale when he says, he's not the tough guy. Robert De Niro is talking to his son, and I use that. I think there's another bit where I use him where he's sort of, you know, just the archetypal kind of like ideal. It was like a private poem which came out. But anyway, yeah, I love him. He's a great artist, and more of a fan of his young work. But anyway.
What about the Circle Line?
Yeah, I live quite near the Circle Line. I live sort of like up in Queen's Park area in London, far, and I always thought it was quite a beautiful line. Sobersini has his Districts and Circle Line collection, which I remember seeing once, reading and stuff, and the Circle Line appears because there's a drinking game with the prefects at my school. It's the Circle Line drinking game. So they all go to London while I was at boarding school, and they all go to London, and they have a half pint at every stop on the Circle Line. And I thought, well, the reason that my reaction to going to that boarding school, Eton, was to do everything the opposite of what you're supposed to do. So I was like, my idea was to do a reverse Circle Line pub tour. And the idea was that we basically kind of ended up in a rave crawl. It wasn't a pub crawl, it was a rave crawl. So we were all in industrial estates, in small flat roof pubs in industrial estates, doing a rave crawl in the beer garden.
And where does the title come from, In Dreams of Diminished Responsibility?
Delmore Schwartz. So Delmore Schwartz wrote a book which was his first book, I believe, which is In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. And then he was the famous confessional poet who was friends with Robert Lowell and John Berryman and figures like that. And basically, I forgot about that, but basically it comes from the fact that diminished responsibility is a kind of, you know, term used for people who have committed a crime and have diminished responsibility because they have a mental illness. It was a kind of joke about how sometimes people sort of give you the soft bigotry of low expectations, and how people sort of, you know, relate to you in this kind of slightly sort of have low expectations of you because you have schizoaffective and stuff. And my dreams begin responsibility, and it was a bit of a sort of slightly kind of harsh joke about it.
Well, if people want to get a copy of In Dreams of Diminished Responsibility, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Miguel Cullen, who we've been chatting with today. Miguel, thanks so much for joining us.
No worries, and thank you. Lovely to talk to you, and it's just nice to be able to talk about the book, and hopefully through the book, through the art, light could be cast on mental health issues and just a bit of humour as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Miguel.
Cheers, bye. Thank you.